Hello and welcome to an all new holiday weekend episode of the Up the Coast podcast. As always, I am your host, Tyler, and I'm joined today once again by our guest in residence, Tristan Freeman of Busting Brackets, Hoops HQ, the Field of 68 Daily. Tristan, thank you for joining me here once again, right before conference play kicks off in the ACC.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. And I think safe to say outside like a couple of teams, we have completed the non-con, and now we can talk about finally league play for the conference.
Yeah, and we're gonna hope that sometime between now and when this episode comes out, and between this episode coming out and conference play, we don't get something insane like Georgia Tech losing to Florida A&M or something like that. But hopefully, it's all just smooth sailing. A lot of crap bye games here to go. I'm sure we'll see some teams struggle with this being on the precipice of Christmas break and all, but probably should be undefeated from here on out for the ACC. But our little gimmick for this episode today is we're going to go into the 8 conversations that we feel like need to be had before this ACC conference play. They could be questions, they could be hot takes, they could be notable players, notable teams, just various different viewpoints we have. We can go really anywhere we want with this. Tristan, where do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing for ACC is talking about the potential hot seat for several of these teams, and I think the non-con play sort of didn't have anyone safe, so to speak. I think coming into the season, teams like Syracuse, Wake Forest, possibly Notre Dame, Pittsburgh were teams to watch if their team struggled. And I think for the most part there was positive signs, but there also were definitely some steps taken back. I mean, Syracuse losing their game to Hofstra, struggling in the players there. I think what was a solid start for Red Autry with a really good team on paper, I think people are now down on them. And it'll be interesting to see which of these teams potentially falls out because, Notre Dame might not have Marcus Burton back. I mean, we saw Pitt struggle against any good team. I don't think we can call Penn State a good team. So
No,
that
we
that
can't.
still stands.
They're
No.
worse than
So
Hofstra.
yeah, and ultimately, if you finish in the bottom three, and then considering that some of these teams, and I'll be for a hot take later, look like they will not be in the bottom, then I think that it's going to force at least one coaching change at the end of the year when there was a chance that we could have had none.
I think we could have as many as 5. You did say that there were no hot take coaches who really helped themselves in the non-con. There is one, and I don't think it's 100% over. They could completely collapse, but I think they've shown us at this point they're not going to, and that's North Carolina. If they finish in the top 20, I cannot imagine that they'll be moving on from Hubert Davis at the end of the season.
No, and arguably their second best player had missed almost all of the non-con, and they still managed to only have one loss on their resume. So I think, if anything else, I think Hubert Davis has definitely put himself in a really good position for sure.
Yeah, they would have to get significantly worse over the next 2 months, but those ones at the bottom, I mean, I wouldn't feel good if I was any of the 5 between. Uh, I wouldn't feel good if I'm any of the 4 between Autry, Stoudemire, Capel, or Grant. I think we can talk more about Micah Shrewsbury because that's part of one of mine coming up later. I'm not sure what to think about his future prospects at this point, but the fact that Syracuse beat Tennessee and played so well against Kansas may actually work against Red Autry because it showed how good this team can be on certain nights. But to me, every time I watch them, I come away thinking less and less and less about them. And the struggles against St. Joe's, followed by the loss against Hofstra 48 hours later, to me just really proves that this is a team that is a lot closer to maybe suffering one injury and missing the ACC tournament entirely than they are to getting into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean they've been without Donnie Freeman, who had a really good start to the year, and then everyone else, it's been, a sort of, in well, say average across the board. I mean, they've had great play from William Kyle, the UCLA transfer, sort of shored up the 5 spot. They gotten, solid production from the guards, but JJ Starlin, Nathan George, I don't know if that backcourt pairing has been great. Kyle Anthony and Sadiq White has been a fine as freshman, but with Donnie Freeman out, they've definitely been missing that punch, and they've also just been playing to the level of their competition. They've done well against good teams. They've been really poor against average teams, and that's not really a good recipe because that means that they'll compete against Duke and UNC, but then they could very well lose to Florida State or Boston College. And if that happens in league play, the Red Autry is going to be in real trouble.
Well, and they play Pitt twice. And that feels like a guaranteed split at this point.
Yeah. I think it's an early game in league play too. I mean, they have to play at Pitt January 10th. So if you're Orange and you start out league play with Clemson, Georgia Tech, Pitt, Florida State, Boston College, Virginia Tech, I mean, this is a very favorable schedule for the Orange. Like if you don't find yourself in a really good position, especially considering how backloaded the second half of the league is, if you're 500 during the first month of the year, then it could get real dicey.
So the only other one I'm really interested in diving into at this moment, Georgia Tech has done a great job over the last 2 months of making a great case that they are the worst team in the ACC. And yet, eye test wise, I just don't feel that way. And between Dongo and Ciala, they got a terrific back line. There seems to be one good guard every game, whether it's Reeves or Washington or Kraft. Do you think there's any chance that Georgia Tech is respectable enough that we're not having a Stoudemire conversation in March? I feel like they could be, but they've done zero to prove it.
Well, they have 4 losses, and those 4 losses were all teams that were in the top 200. So there's literally no evidence that they can beat a good team. Their best win on paper, I think, is Georgia Southern, and that was a
Maybe
2 point win,
Marist.
which that says it itself. I mean, their front court's fine, but their back court is just not very good. I mean, Kawasi Reeves has sort of stepped up for them as a senior, leads them in scoring, but and Kai Fleming has been good as a freshman, but Lamar Washington, Cam Kraft has been for them overall. Jayden Hustoff did not take the leap that I thought he could. They have Duke on the road to open league play. I think that could get ugly. But then, Boston College and Syracuse there. So I think at home. So we'll know pretty early if they can't win those games, then they could very well end in the bottom. And ultimately, I do think Stoudemire could find himself in trouble because I don't know if you're going to get Ndongo for another year if you're not competitive whatsoever. Or Sela, because at this point, he'll be one of the top available big men if he wanted the portal from a losing team.
They're one of the two teams that I think the schedule sets up to really reveal something to us very early. Let's be honest, Duke is going to annihilate them on New Year's Eve. But then right after that, home Boston College, home Syracuse, you mentioned, at Miami, home Pitt. That's a pretty generous 4 game stretch. And maybe they don't have to win 3 out of 4, but they better at least look pretty competitive in all 4 of those games. Or we can just go ahead and write them off in January.
Yeah, man, I've kind of written them off already based on their non-con play. I mean, losing to DePaul, I mean, it's just not a good loss whatsoever. And then you also lost to Drake, who is a fine Missouri Valley team, but then Mississippi State's been struggling as well, and their best performance to date was a road loss to Georgia, and that's just not good enough for them.
Yeah, I mean, they should have lost to Maryland Eastern Shore, number 345.
Yeah.
Maryland Eastern Shore. But my first one, I guess I'll pose a question to you before we go into it. Is there one team in this league that you can think of and say, yes, we were all just significantly wrong in our offseason prognostications on them? I think there's a few that have slipped. Like, for one, I had NC State as a legitimate contender in this league. I think they've dropped down a tier. They're still an NCAA tournament team to me. someone who can still compete for a top four spot, but that's not some significant drop off. I can't find one. So is there somebody I'm missing here?
I think Cal, because I think that on paper the roster had a chance to be at the very bottom because it was full of players who have very low floors. But they've outside of a road loss at Kansas State. I mean, they beat UCLA, they beat Utah. They basically outside of Pacific, handled business against the rest of the non-con bye games with ease. I think they've shown enough, and considering they got several players who can sort of give you 20 on any single night, I do think Cal has over exceeded expectations a bit, where it was like they were a definite bottom end of the team next to a Boston College, but I do think they can be much more competitive than at least I expected.
Okay, so that's the closest one for me. I picked them dead last. I was absolutely wrong. But it seemed to me like I was way under consensus on them, that most people felt like this could be a 13th, 14th, 15th place team. I think they're still probably a little bit better than that, although they're going to have to get into this tougher slate and really prove it. But for me, there's just been too many teams that have stuck close to consensus. Virginia's a little better than we thought. NC State's a little worse. Wake Forest's a little better than we thought. I think Syracuse is a little worse. Georgia Tech, I think we thought would be bad, but not horrific. Duke's probably a little better than we thought. But I'm now trying to find who are the teams that have just been tricking our eyes the past 2 months. Because there's no way that everyone was this right in the transfer portal era. So there's a team or two that we've looked at them in the past couple of months and seen what we wanted to see, and they'll expose themselves later on. So some potential candidates for this. I think on the potential downside, Miami, who just played an absolute god awful schedule. They're two really tough games. They were not particularly competitive against either Florida or BYU. You can forgive that. That's two Final Four caliber contenders. They beat Ole Miss. Other than that, they have just played a big pile of crap. Like their best wins, they beat Georgetown on a neutral court. That's not all that impressive. All of a sudden, blowing out Elon at home looks pretty good after what the Phoenix did last week and taking Virginia Tech to the brink and beating Richmond. But other than that, Miami has not proven to us that they are actually truly a real bubble contender. The starting five is awesome. I don't believe in this team at all when they go to the bench. And we just learned Marcus Allen's going to be undergoing cancer treatments the rest of the season, so that hurts them even more. The starting five hasn't even been that healthy. And I'm just wondering what happens when they get into the grind of conference play. And you can't just play all of those guys 32 minutes a night and hope that Malavec comes out and makes some shots. The depth may wear thin really quickly. And then the other one on a plus side is Stanford, who I think we all said, well, the smart people at least said, this is not a bottom of the league team just because they have Kyle Smith and he'll find some guys. They're kind of proving right now to be a slightly above bottom of the league team. The end of the Seattle game was awful. The end of the UNLV game was awful, but they've beaten St. Louis. They've blown out Colorado. And I think there's a chance that as this team gets older and matures as the season goes along, that maybe they are better. And that this is a team that once again could threaten to finish somewhere around the middle of the pack.
I mean, look, when you have one of the best freshmen in the country in Buka Kore, who clearly I thought, obviously his hot start wasn't going to be, sustainable averaging 28 a game, but he's still around 22 a game. And now is part of everyone's scout of who to stop in it, and they haven't been able to. And Chisholm Opara averaging 15 a game. I think he's taken a leap that I thought he could coming over from Harvard after playing sort of role in his first year. And yeah, I mean they've largely handled business. I mean, the loss to Seattle doesn't look as embarrassing whatsoever, considering this is the Seattle team who just knocked off Washington and could contend for top three in WCC. Losing to ULB isn't great either. But while, Stanford isn't going to be vying for being a contender, road games at Stanford, and that's what something I'll be talking about later, I think the road games for them is going to be a lot harder than teams are going to expect. I'm surprised you didn't list SMU because they're a team who, depending on a couple of overtime results, could be right in a four-game losing streak coming into league play because they almost lost to Texas A&M, blown that game, and also lost against Mississippi State. And they're losing to Vandy, that's fine. I just don't think LSU is that great, but losing to them isn't the worst thing in the world. But other than a close win against Butler, they have no convincing regular season wins. And it looks like a team that doesn't defend well against good teams. They'll be able to score, but I think there's a scenario where SMU could become the disappointing team once league play comes.
That's definitely a good one. They kind of feel like they're right perfectly in the Enfield zone again, where wherever it's required, record wise, for them to get a 1 or 2 seed in the NIT, that's what they're going to do. The only counter I would throw out, because I'm really concerned about their bench as well, just like Miami's. But Jaden Toombs, who missed the beginning of the season with an injury, has started off pretty well, their elite freshman recruit, now that he's actually been able to get out there. He was their, I was going to say he was their best player against LSU. He was really the only guy who played well against LSU. And so now they at least have an extra option in the front line. But yeah, that's a really good one because there's a lot of potentially shaky spots with them. And especially if they lose one guy or if BJ Edwards gets in foul trouble, that crushes their defense. Like there's a lot of flimsy things with the Mustangs.
You want to go to the second storyline?
Yeah, yeah, go into your next one.
Yeah. I think mine, obviously, the game of the weekend was Texas Tech's 82-81 comeback win against Duke in Madison Square Garden. I thought the Red Raiders were cooked, but credit to them for coming back. And I think that game was sort of emblematic of the flaw or the potential reason why Duke won't make a Final Four, despite having the nation's leading scorer and favorite for player of the year in Cameron Boozer, who had 23, 8, and 7 in that game. He just didn't have a lot of help. I mean, he was the only starter in double figures for them. His brother Caden Boozer has quietly been coming along, and I think, he came off the bench but had a solid 13. But, Isaiah Evans, 4 points in 30 minutes. Patrick Ndabangla, just 4 points. Caleb Foster, who's supposed to be sort of your vet lead guard, 8 points as well. And against a Texas Tech team who were decimated because of injuries and foul trouble, still ended up having more depth than the Blue Devils. And I think everyone would view Duke as the team to beat for the ACC regular season title, but I don't think it's as definitive as people may view it on paper. I think that there are real chances for them to take, multiple losses in league play. And if teams, find a way to sort of slow down Boozer in any way, then Duke could really be in trouble, at least on the offensive end.
Okay, so this ties into one of mine as well, which is that I think we're headed for a great ACC regular season title race here. 3 to 4 teams. Louisville, North Carolina, and Virginia are a lot closer to Duke than I think people realize and want to accept right now. So it's funny that you come out praising Cam Boozer from that Texas Tech game, and I know that the stat line says that he played a great game. I actually feel like he kind of underperformed in that. And the situation that Texas Tech found themselves in, where they basically had two big men for the entire game. LeJean Watts fouls out with 12 minutes left. JT Toppin is in foul trouble the entire way through. Uh, Leon Horner, who was some freshman small forward who was barely playing going into the game, he was masquerading as their center for good chunks of time. He fouled out in only 13 minutes. And they were just so woefully undersized. And I feel like that game was set up for Cam Boozer to either score 40 or have like 15 assists. And as the game went on and Texas Tech started throwing those complicated traps at him, I felt like he was making some bad decisions with the ball. Now, Duke's shooters did not help him in any way, shape, or form, but it was a game that could have been better. He missed some really timely free throws, and so did Gungba. I came out of that game very disappointed in everyone on Duke except for Malik Brown, who was really the one guy trying to will them through the end of that game. Texas Tech was pummeling them on the offensive boards without any size. Um, Gongbo was excellent at drawing fouls and basically did nothing else in that game. But it really did expose a lot of flaws with Duke, like you said, where their best playmakers are their big men. And if they're going to run traps at them all game, then we should have had them coming back from commercials in the second half with those little highlight packages where they're breaking down. Look at the ball movement. One, two, three passes. Isaiah Evans is wide open. Nick Kamania is wide open. Caden Boozer's wide open. And Duke is now on a run where they're sitting at 55% from three. And they just didn't do that. And I think everyone kind of shares in the blame on that a little bit. But yeah, I just feel like you take that game with last year's team, and either Con Knipple or Sion James ends up on fire. And it's not fair to compare them to that group, but you're trying to win a national title. That's who you're going to get comped to, and I just don't think Duke is there right now.
And their wing play is has been suspect in part because Dame Sarr, who was supposed to be the alternative for Cedric Howard, going to the NBA instead of playing for them, he only plays 10 minutes because he's been a quiet disappointment for them this non-call. I mean, he made us through a few threes, but clearly Shire doesn't trust him to be out there, and if he's not making threes, then he's not going to be able to give them much, especially considering he also gets in the foul trouble, so he's not even giving you the 3-and-D aspect consistently. And unless he takes a turn, or Darren Harris becomes more of a factor, then they're ultimately going to be Isaiah Evans goes for 20 plus, or it's going to be close games for Duke in league play.
Yeah, it seemed like Sarr was having his breakout in the first half, and then he didn't score in the second half. It's pretty emblematic of his season so far. The competition for them is just going to be tougher too. I think I think they could kind of throw on the coast switch last year and really work their way through it. So, taking it to mind that this is going to be a tight title race, their double games are against North Carolina and Louisville. So they're going to have to play probably number two and number three in the league twice each. They don't play Miami at all. Um, Carolina and Louisville get stuck because they both don't play one of the awful teams. Carolina doesn't play Boston College. Louisville doesn't play Florida State. So that's not going to necessarily help them. Although Virginia doesn't play Clemson. So that's a sneaky nice one for the Cavaliers. Their doubles are Virginia Tech and NC State. So the schedules kind of even out. I think someone's going to give them a great run for their money.
I mean,
Uh,
and also I'll say Duke has a 5 game stretch where you got road games at FSU, Louisville. You have the California road trip, which is now tougher than expected, and then sandwich in is the home game with SMU, and probably the SMU team that's going to be fairly motivated to get their signature win.
that kind of feels like a game, though, where everyone starts labeling it as a trap game, and all of a sudden Duke's up 30 at halftime.
Very, very possible.
My only other thing with this, are you concerned about Louisville? And they played two crap games, but I also feel like they probably beat Tennessee if Michael Brown Jr. had played in that game. Like they desperately missed him in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Michael Brown is probably going to be the reason they either make a Final Four run or get bounced early. But I feel like the front court is the concern because you're getting basically nothing from Ali Khalifa and Kashawn Pryor, which I wasn't expecting that.
Both of
And
whom
while
look good when they're out there.
yeah, but I mean, but it's in spurts. I mean, not for an entire not for an entire round. And while Sonata Frew has been solid for them, and Connie Roots have sort of fallen off a bit, but they're going to need more because you can't just assume that Ryan Conwell and McNeely are going to combine for 10 threes a game and Brown gives you 20. So I'm concerned about Louisville a bit as a Final Four contender, but I do think that they're going to shoot their way to a lot of wins in league play.
Yeah, we'll see what happens over the Christmas break. They probably do need to toughen up on defense, but I'm not as worried as a lot of others seem to be. But all right, you want to go into your third one?
Yes, and since we're talking about Duke, I think it'd only be fair to talk about their arch rival, North Carolina. We mentioned that they went 11-1 in league play, and they got a very important win over Ohio State, if nothing else, just to keep people off of Hubert's back. And they got a big boost with the return of Steph Trimble, who had 17 points for them in his third game back. And it's ironic in that game, UNC had only three guys who scored more than 6 points. Their two bigs, Caleb Wilson, Henry Visar, and then Trimble. And I think it's such a huge thing for them to have Trimble back as a guard who can give you double-digit scoring, a proven veteran, capable offensive player, and to have that guy balance out the front court, which is one of the best in the country. Now, all of a sudden, with him in the fold, then I do think we need to talk about North Carolina being a genuine contender for the ACC title. And because they're a team that can match up with Duke on the inside, and now they have arguably a better backcourt because Trimble's back in the fold.
He was so much better than I was expecting coming off that injury. It does feel like their bench finally has some bounce to it with Stevenson sliding down, who's been very good this year. Derek Dixon might be the key because at this point, I am now 100% certain he's better than Kyan Evans. I'd also like to see a little more life out of Jonathan Powell, but no, I think looking forward with Trimble's return and Dixon's emergence, I feel really great that this team has four guys now. And they can just kind of figure out, is it Bogovac or is it Stevenson on a given game? Visar Visar is not getting enough hype. I thought about putting him as one of these categories for myself. I feel like he's actually getting better as the season goes on, and he's getting more comfortable as a passer. He had put up a 17, 10, and 5 in this one. And I think that's actually just as big of an impact as Trimble coming back. Is that Visar and Wilson now might be two of the 5 or 6 best guys in the ACC.
Yeah, and I would say this, and I'm not really an odds maker kind of guy, but is Boozer a lock for ACC Player of the Year? Because I wonder in a scenario where UNC somehow wins the regular season title, if assuming Wilson does what he's been doing all year, that he doesn't win the prize, or is Boozer just so solidified as the best player in the league that it's almost going to be impossible to take that away from him, no matter where they finish?
I would think about a scenario of, does Caleb Wilson just put up a monster game and outplay Boozer in the regular season finale?
Mm.
Because if they're close, that could swing it. Yeah, this is what I'm talking about, though. I think everyone is so entrenched on this idea that Duke's going to go like 16-2 and just run through this league that they would say, yeah, of course Boozer's a lock. Now, I think Carolina has to flat out win it for Wilson to do it, but yeah, I could see it. All right, my third one, I want to talk about a freshman on a bad team. And so much of the conversation the next couple of weeks and months is going to be focused on the 10 to 12 teams that have legitimate NCAA tournament dreams in the ACC. There is one team and one guy that I am going to be fascinated to continue to watch outside of that group, and that's Jalen Harrelson of Notre Dame, who has just been nothing short of excellent in the absence of Marcus Burton. And I think he's going to swing a lot over these next 2 months. First of all, his December performance, and especially what he did to gut them through that TCU win on the road the night that Burton got hurt, he is now 100% a first round pick in the NBA draft for next year. I think he can play himself clearly into the top 10 if he takes another continued leap as the go to guy for the Irish coming up here in the next couple of months. But he is good enough that when the shooters are hot, the Shrewsberries and the Sundras and pet food guy Logan Imes, that they might knock off one of these top four teams. They could kill the bubble hopes of a Clemson or an SMU or an NC State at some point. But at the same time, if Harrelson is just kind of this excellent but not superstar level player that he is at the moment, which is where he was in the IPFW loss, 21 9 and 4, and their shooters didn't show up and they lost at home to you would know better than me. Are they a mediocre Horizon League team?
They're top half. It's not the worst loss in the world, but it's still not one that you should have if you're a team with postseason hopes.
Yeah, which they're not anymore. If Marcus Burton doesn't come back, this team's not making the NCAA tournament. I think we can say that with confidence. But you flip to the other side, if Harrelson doesn't go up a level, what does that mean in terms of Micah Shrewsberry's safety and his hot seat? Because I don't think anyone else on this roster has the power to elevate this team. Like Braden Shrewsbury is just a heat check secondary shooter at this point. It's going to be a lot on Harrelson's shoulders in the way it was for Marcus Burton the last 2 years. But by the way, it's going to be fun. And I'm really, really enjoying watching him play and grow as a player.
Yeah, I mean, they also have other guys who just haven't taken that leap. I mean, Carson Tout's one of the best rebounders in the country, but he's not giving you much on the offensive end, which is going to really hurt them now. Sir Muhammad was a former top 50 guy and pretty much, back at the end rotation guy. Keba Njai has played just 8 minutes in the last game. And it's interesting because Jalen Harrelson doesn't shoot the ball. He's 0-8 from three. So I do wonder where that puts him as an NBA draft prospect and how high, that'll affect him. But I mean, he could play great and be a one done guy, and the team's still not in the tournament, which basically meant that it was a waste of year from the Irish fan base. And then, if Marcus Burton right now, if he doesn't come back, he's eligible for a red shirt. And if they're not good enough to compete for a postseason bid, then there's no reason for him to come back. And if he doesn't come back and, he's not related to Micah Shrewsbury like Braden is he a portal candidate himself? So there's so many ways that these next couple months can go that will redefine the program and what they can do. They have to be competitive. Otherwise, they can lose their top prospect, they can lose their top player, and then what do you do? I think in the end, I think Micah will get a fourth year because you can't fire someone when your best player gets hurt. I think that would just be a bad move. But yeah, I think this is going to quickly turn into a lost year because I just don't know where they're going to get this offensive production unless it's Harrelson giving you 20 a game. And that's just a lot to put on a freshman, particularly one that isn't necessarily a shooter as a perimeter player.
Yeah, I look at a stretch for them that they have in late January at North Carolina, home Boston College, home Virginia, at Syracuse. And that's almost kind of the swing run for them where they could easily go on the road and officially just put an end to Syracuse's season. They could knock North Carolina or Virginia down a seed line. They're certainly good enough to do that. Or Boston College could come into the Joyce Center and just kind of bully them. Those might be some hideous games, by the way. Like that might be first to 55 wins again between the Eagles and the Irish. that could be the kind of game where we walk away just realizing that this entire era of Notre Dame basketball is over.
They have a win. They have a very winnable last stretch of games in the bottom half of February, outside of the home game against Duke. But again, if they're not in contention, there's no reason for Marcus Burton to return for that. But if they can somehow hold things steady and get a couple of wins, then maybe you can make the case for him to want to come back.
By the way, 11 Ultimate Sickos game, 11 p.m. Friday night, January 2nd at Cal. That's kind of a fun one, but we'll see who
That
stays up for that.
that first weekend will be interesting because if Cal and Stanford are good as I think they are, then the Irish should probably be 0-2 before their own homestand
Yeah.
following.
And one of them could easily catch Louisville and a kind of a New Year's hangover going out there for that trip as well. But I think that might tie into your last one.
Yeah, I had Stanford and Cal among my bottom three with Boston College in my preseason ACC rankings. And based on what I've seen from them and from a couple other teams like Florida State, I have a hot take that I believe that both Stanford and Cal will win 10 plus games in league play. That they will at least go 500. And part of that is going to be that road trips going to there are going to be very difficult. And I think that they can win those games. And then looking at Cal specifically, their schedule is set up fairly nice for them to make a run. I'll take a real quick look at it. They have Notre Dame. They have games against, and this is on the road, by the way, road games against Florida State, Stanford, Boston College, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, and Syracuse. Those are all very winnable games outside the ones in which teams have to come back to their place. So I do think there's a scenario where these teams can really win a good amount of games in league play and be very big thorns in their sides and create the discussion of why do these East Coast teams have to travel out west for these late night games, where I do think that they're now going to be much more vulnerable to losing this time around.
So if you'd said one of the two get to 10, I would just flat out say yes. Ken Palm is Cal at 9-9, Stanford at 7-11. That's the one I'm kind of reaching on. Stanford, now, and maybe this gets back to what I talked about earlier, and this team is just getting a lot better. Jeremy Dent Smith really coming alive in that St. Louis game and continuing to play well has completely changed their rotation and how much they're able to now rely on him and give Gieler and Okore actual real rest in these games. It almost feels to me like there's just room for one of them to get to that number, but that's an interesting one. And God,
It also will. It all. I just want to say it also will determine how many of these teams start to free fall. Because I think if teams like Syracuse, Notre Dame, Pitt, and Georgia Tech just really just turn it in and just start losing out, then I think that makes it even more obtainable for those teams to get the 10 wins.
well, except the flip side is what if we get somewhat of a repeat of last year and all of a sudden Duke, North Carolina, Louisville, and Virginia are just beating the hell out of everybody that walks through their court. So we could get both ends on that. But yeah, I mean, Cal, had they not played their worst 8 minutes of the year at the worst possible time to kick off that Kansas State game, they'd be undefeated right now. Pippen looks it seems like Pippen's healthy. The only thing I'll say, they better get Petritus back and soon because I think they miss him badly in crunch time. Like they almost get to play it perfectly where they throw that starting lineup out there every game and see which one of those four perimeter players just isn't making shots so that they can take him out for Petritus late. They just don't have the same defensive intensity without him.
True, but you've gotten an awesome, efficient year from Chris Bell, averaging almost 15 a game on 41% shooting from deep and 92% from the line. I mean, if this is the version of you're going to get from Chris Bell, who's already a proven ACC player, with the other guys like Dede Ames, who we knew who can score at Virginia last year, then I don't think that this Cal team is going to have much of a drop off in league play. And again, they already shown they can beat a good defensive team in UCLA. So and Mark Madsen's an underrated coach as well. Like he has success. Last year, first year in the league, I think clearly has some ups and downs, but this is definitely a roster you can win games with.
Yeah, I had him in the Shrewsbury Autry zone coming into this year of you need to prove it to me. Um, Madsen has a lot more than those two this season. All right, so my last team, funny enough, as I try to click to them on the schedule, the team that Cal does not play this season, NC State, who has that just embarrassing November into the Auburn beatdown loss in the ACC SEC Challenge. They kind of wake up. They throttle Liberty 85-45. They play pretty well in that Kansas game, a game that they should have won. Let's not let that pass over. It's a very rare opportunity where you get a potential Q1 home game that's going to be treated as such, and then the other team just loses their best guy for the last 8 minutes and overtime. And they should have pulled it out, but I felt like that was their best performance in a big game all year. They come back, they drop 108 on Texas Southern, and we get this weird Will Wade press conference where he is just admonishing his team for not playing hard enough, for not playing well enough on the defensive end. And Sam Fetterman and I talked about it a couple weeks ago. It's a weird bugaboo. It doesn't make sense why the NC State defense is not better. Well, they went out against Ole Miss in their last non-conference game and proved that that defense can be better. 7 points surrendered in the first 10 minutes, 39 in the first 30 minutes. The only reason that game looked close is because a couple of Ole Miss guys got hot in the last 8 minutes when the intensity came down. But that Wade speech was a big turning point because that's a moment where when you have a bunch of players who have only been in that locker room for a couple months, you walk out of that thinking either, wow, this guy's an asshole, or yeah, he's right, and it's time for us to kick it into gear. In that Ole Miss game, they kicked it into gear. So I am now fascinated to see, was NC State just kind of dogging it through the non-con? Have they found a new fire? Is this now the two-way dominant team that we had thought that they potentially could be? And this is the other schedule that is going to reveal a lot early on. They get Wake Forest and Virginia at home to kick things off. Those are tough games that they're going to have to prove themselves like they did against Ole Miss. And then after that, they can kind of ease off the pedal for a little bit with basically the easiest 5 game stretch you can get in the ACC nowadays. Definitely the easiest you can get with 4 away games. At Boston College, at Florida State, home Georgia Tech, at Clemson, at Pitt. And then let's even toss in Syracuse at home after that. It don't get much easier than getting those 5 teams in a 6 game stretch. And so NC State could easily rattle off a 7-1, 8-0 run, have a renewed sense of defensive pride, and we could be talking about them as a real sleeper as things start turning to February. Or they just jumped up the energy for one game to get Will Wade off their back, and this is who they are, and they're headed straight for the bubble. And I really don't know which. I'm fascinated to see.
Yeah, I mean, the game with Mississippi was also featuring the coach Chris Beard, who also had a famous post-game presser where he's not happy with his team either. And the AJ Store experiment has not been going well for the Rebels,
Shocker.
and I think there's a chance that Ole Miss just might fall on his face in league play, and that win may not mean much for NC State. But I mean, Darren Williams, who was the ACC Player of the Year, who had a fantastic start to the year, has been real inconsistent as of late, with a few duds, and that's a big concern because I don't think this team can win with him having that. I mean, they were able to win against without him pretty much against Ole Miss, but it's a big concern. I do think the front court defense with Ben Allen Lubin, sort of being their interior guy, I think that's going to be a concern. especially against Duke and UNC. Like we'll have to see how that works out. And then threes have been the story with them. They're a really good 3-point shooting team, top 20 in percentage, and they shoot a lot of them. But they give up a lot of threes as well. I mean, they average 27 allowed, and against some of these teams who can get hot from deep, that can be a recipe for disaster. So it'll be really interesting to see how the defense improves. I do think that they're a team that can absolutely score the bucket, but they might honestly be, another version of NC State, SMU, where they can put up a lot of points, can look impressive at times, and it can also just look real bad because they just give up a ton of shots as well.
So the Darion Williams inconsistency part, I'm not super concerned about the duds, although I don't know how he possibly ever plays 28 minutes in a game and doesn't make a field goal like he did against Ole Miss. He had plenty of duds at Texas Tech, but amidst that, he's not having the dominant performances. And he hasn't scored 20 points in a game in their last eight. His high water mark in that time is 17 against Kansas. He only got to that number because the game went to overtime. And that's the run where they've played bad basketball. Like, where is the guy who swung the Arkansas game in March last year? We really haven't seen him save for a couple minutes against UNC Greensboro in November.
Yeah, but I mean, overall, I mean, Quadir Copeland has been really good for them. Uh, Trey Holloman has been fine. Paul McNeil has been a bright spot for them as well. So they'll be competitive, but I do think that they're closer to the bubble portion of the ACC than they are to the top tier for sure. Like probably maybe a tier below Virginia because I feel more sure about them coming in the league play. But I do think for those who still had NC State, picked around 3 through 5, there's still definitely a chance for that to happen.
Okay, last team here. This isn't one of my topics, but we didn't talk about them at all. And I still find them endlessly fascinating. Clemson ends the year either a top nine seed in the NCAA tournament, a 10, 11 slash first four in the NCAA tournament, or missing it altogether.
I every game that they played was close in a non-con. Like they could have lost, they could have beaten Georgetown, they should have beaten BYU. They were up in that game. They had a shot against Bama, and then they also probably could have lost to South Carolina. I have no idea what to make of this team. I just think Brad Barnell is just a really good coach and who is making it work. But the fact that you have no one averaging more than 12 points a game on this roster means that you're just going to need 5 or 6 guys to give you 8 to 10 points. And I think that's going to be a concern in league play, even though they are a really, really good defensive team. I'm just not sold on them. I think that they could be squarely 10-10 in league play, but I also can see a scenario where they beat UNC in Louisville and still find a way to be at least in the bubble conversation.
They just have no game to game consistency from any players outside of basically RJ Gottfried. And losing Zach Foster to the torn ACL really hurts. I still don't understand. Like every analytic measure for them says that they are a surefire tournament team. Excuse me, somewhere in that 7, 8 range. I don't understand how Cincinnati came back. Like I gave up. I almost turned that game off 10 minutes in. They were throttling them. They were up 23 at one point. They pitched a shutout the first, I think, 8 minutes. Cincinnati had the ball with a chance to tie twice in the final minute of that. To me, it just feels like they are headed straight for being like a 50-50 bubble mystery. By the way, another team with kind of a soft schedule to start off. At Syracuse, at Pitt, home SMU, at Notre Dame, home Boston College, home Miami. They could run through that and we might not learn anything about them still. And if they struggle, then I guess we do start to learn about them. But yeah, they feel like a dead bubble team to me. And everything right now says they're better than that.
Yeah, I mean, a year ago, the game at Pitt proved to be a defining game for both teams for different reasons because that set up Clemson for its elite start, and it was start of the Pitt's downfall from being top 25 to nowhere near the tournament mix. So that'll be an interesting game as well. I mean, if you're, by the way, if you're a Pitt who obviously has had plenty of stumbling blocks as well, that's a very winnable game for them. If you're a team, especially a coach and capable, who probably needs to win a certain amount of games to sort of guarantee yourself to be with the job next year. So if Clemson, gets swept, then I'm pretty sure we can take them out of conversation. If they're a competitive 1-1, then nothing changes. But if they go 2-0, then another year, another overachieving Tigers rod.
All right, we've gone a while. Let's just do like a 2 minute pit corner here. I don't know where you want to go with this. We gonna talk Kieran Mullen today? I want DeMarco Minor to be more aggressive. That's my only comment. That's why they won the Ohio State game. It's because he was playing with pace and putting his head down and really going after defenders. He hasn't done that the whole rest of the year. But what do you think we need to talk about with Pitt here?
I mean, Pitt is a fascinating team in that. Well, I mean, by the way, we saw some Mullen Corin minutes together, considering that Papa Conte is still out with a lower body injury. But this is a team that at some point, and I'm looking at the roster, Indrusitis, Dunning, Witherspoon, Cialepa, Conte, they have had so many guys who at some point has been flat out unplayable, which is why they've lost the games that they lost. But they just they're another team like Clemson where they're just going to need collective good games for everyone. You don't need guys to go for 25, but you don't need Cialepa to go 1 of 8 in the first half or not play in the second half. You don't need Indrusitis to go 2 of 8 and not play in the second half. You had that with Dunning early on, but he sort of climbed his way out of that hole. This is a Pitt team who can defend and is a better 3-point shooting team than I thought they were going to be. So, but again, they just have too many guys that just struggled, especially Witherspoon, who has had a massive freshman wall. But they could be a sneaky team as well. And I think, for Pitt fans, knowing you have a top 10 recruiting class, there's, whispers that Dunning could possibly get another year.
I don't know
You're
how, by the way. I don't see that case. But carry on.
Yeah, I didn't see it with the UNC transfer from Dartmouth, but with this NCAA, who knows? But you're looking ahead to next year, and again, if you're capable, you just don't want to finish 3-17. You just want to ultimately, if you can get to 8 to 9 wins, then it's probably enough to silence the doubters and a couple of signature wins somewhere around the corner too. Like if you can just beat Clemson and Syracuse in the first 2 weeks of league play, and that's probably going to be good enough to quiet some folks.
Do you want to alter your Cal Stanford hot take? Because I'm realizing that you think it's still a 20 game conference season.
Oh no, I meant give me 9. Yeah, I keep switching between the
Yeah.
leagues. Give me. My hot take is 500. So just
Okay.
give me that. And the 9 games, I definitely think is obtainable.
All right. Yeah. My only last pit comment against these other four bottom five teams in the ACC, how it's looking right now: Syracuse, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Boston College. Pitt on a game by game basis is just more interesting to watch. And they'll have more. So when you're going to watch and see if they bust somebody's bubble, they're probably the one that's going to give you the most fun 2 hours.
Well, Florida State is fun in how they play, but their defense just falling off a cliff has been insane. Like
Florida State's kind of fun if you just want to watch the other team have an awesome game.
yeah, I'm not saying Luke Locks is on any kind of hot seat, but if you want to be taken serious, you need to be more competitive. Otherwise, Florida State, who we know doesn't care about basketball compared to football, they're not going to give him anything to work with next offseason. So you gotta do a little bit better than you have.
Yeah, that might be where it's headed for the Seminoles, unfortunately. But Tristan Freeman, Thank you for joining me. Where can everybody find your fine work these days?
Yeah, you mentioned the sites earlier on, Hoops HQ, Field 68 Daily, and Bustin' Brackets, and podcasts everywhere else. But yeah, just go check those out, and then looking forward to previewing the first set of league games, which should be pretty interesting coming up at the end of the year.
All right. Thank you for joining me. Thank you to everyone for listening. Going to take next week off on here, so come back for that first full week of January after we've gotten two sets of conference games under our wings. Be sure to go check out Busting Brackets, both for Tristan's work, and I'll be putting up a weekly update either Friday or Saturday morning, right there after New Year's, leading into those second set of games. Be sure to go check those both out and have a happy holidays. We will be returning in 2026.